Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this edition of Inside ALS United. Joining me is Dr. Richard Bedlack from the Duke ALS Clinic. And we catch up with Dr. Bedlack as often as we can, but sometimes it's not enough. Dr. Bedlack, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dave. Thanks for having me.
You know what? It was a year ago before our spring event season, and we like to do that is to give people a perspective. What has happened in your perspective in the ALS world over the last year, Dr. Bedlack?
Well, Dave, I'll say there's been some good things and some bad things. So, a couple of bad things have happened. People probably heard the news about a month ago now that one of the drugs that we were really excited about, the combination of sodium phenylbutyrate and tor-ursodiol that was known as AMX 0035 and then later known as Relivrio. We had a nice, phase 2 trial, very well conducted. It appeared to show some benefits on some clinical outcome measures that we thought would be meaningful to patients. We fought really hard to get the FDA to approve it, realizing that there would be a phase 3 trial eventually coming, but it would be years. And that time finally came. Unfortunately, that phase 3 trial did not show any benefit. So the best available information we have right now suggests that this medicine probably doesn't help most people with ALS. So that's a bummer. We also heard about a supplement, one of the two ingredients in Relivrio that we thought was very promising, a supplement known as TUDCA, TUDCA. And that also had a preliminary trial that suggested benefits. But just last week, we heard about the phase 3 data. The larger, longer trial doesn't show any benefits. So two things that we thought might work that unfortunately don't work. And, as you can imagine, in this day and age, Dave, I've had a lot of people reaching out to me in the media and social media, asking, did we make a mistake? Should we change the flexibility that's going on at the FDA to keep this from happening again? And I would point out that there was one more drug that the FDA was flexible about approving. That is a drug which was called tofersen, brand name Qalsody. It's an antisense drug that's for people with one specific form of ALS, the kind caused by SOD1 mutations. And there, again, we had, one small trial, and we actually had only biomarker signals suggesting that it might work. The trial was so small that although there was a trend toward clinical benefits, there was no statistical significance. But those biomarker changes were so convincing that the FDA said, let's go ahead and get it out there. We know that people need this. And here, now that we've seen much longer exposure to the drug, that appears to be a home run for people with that form of the disease. So we saw in Basel, Switzerland, a presentation looking at people that have been treated with that drug for more than a year, in some cases up to 2 years. A significant percentage of them are actually very stable now. They're not changing at all. And about 20% are actually recovering lost motor function. So had the FDA not used its regulatory flexibility to approve that drug, we would have just been sitting on what I would consider a blockbuster for that subset of patients. So I don't think that we want to scrap flexibility. I just think that we might want to, maybe have a couple of biomarker criteria in the future, look to the success of the tofersen approval and not to the failure of the Relivrio approval.
Are there other specific things out there that are giving you the most hope right now?
Yeah, that's what keeps me coming back, man. There's more action than I've ever seen in this space. There's over 100 companies in some aspect of drug development for people with ALS. There's been a lot of research to try to understand more about why this is happening. We've discovered new genes that we can target. We're really firming up this association between areas of the United States where there seems to be too much ALS, including the Albemarle Sound of North Carolina, and an association with algae blooms. Now, we don't know exactly what's in these algae blooms. We think there might be a toxin called beta-methylaminoalanine that could be the reason for the excess amount of ALS. And there's already research underway to try to figure out how could we block this algae toxin from causing ALS. It might be as simple as using a nutritional supplement, an amino acid supplement called serine. So I find all that fascinating. I really do believe that if we're going to fix ALS, we have to understand what's causing it. That to me is why tofersen is so successful, because it targets a very well understood cause of ALS. When we're targeting downstream pathways, we're kind of shooting in the dark. These are not causes of ALS, things like oxidative stress and neuroinflammation and, excitotoxicity. These are things that are happening, but they're not the cause. And so we might get some slowing from agents targeting those things. And maybe by combining agents with different mechanisms, we could have a much bigger impact on the disease. But to fix it, I think we're going to have to go after causes. And it's nice to see that there's more action there. I'll say just personally, Dave, something that I'm very excited about is something that has perplexed me from my first days in the ALS clinic 23 years ago. People with this disease change so differently from each other. The progression of the disease is so variable between patients. I mean, I've had patients who got the disease and only lasted 6 months, and I've had patients who've been with me 20 years. Stephen Hawking had it for 50 years. We know there's a small group of people who get it, progress for a while, then recover from it. What explains all this variability? There hasn't been a lot of attention on that until just recently. And I've always felt that Mother Nature was trying to tell me something. If I could understand why people are so different in their progression, maybe I could make everybody either have slow progression or recover from ALS. And we're starting to get some clues. So again, in Basel, Switzerland in December, we saw an amazing presentation from a researcher at Columbia who pretty firmly now has shown us that there's a dietary influence on ALS progression, that people who are consuming a diet that has a high glycemic index, one with a lot of sugars and carbohydrates, are actually progressing much more slowly than people with other types of diets. And, this is another example of why people should be very cautious about what's on some of these sketchy internet websites, because a lot of them are telling people just the opposite. Cut sugar from your diet, cut gluten from your diet. That's not what the science says. The science says just the opposite. We at Duke have found that there's a difference in the composition of the gut microbiome in people with very slow and very fast progressing ALS. That's the family of organisms that lives inside our GI tracts. And, it's been known for years that that's probably important in diseases of the gut, but only recently has anyone thought maybe it's important in ALS. And wow. I don't think it necessarily causes ALS, but I do think it might explain why people do so differently. And I think this is more than an association, because we've been able to take the stool of slow or fast progressing patients and put it into the colon of the SOD1 mouse model and change the progression rate. So there's something in there that really causes a progression difference. And we've got some clues. We're working with a company now to develop a probiotic that we hope to put into clinical trials in late 2024 or early 2025. And then finally, the most extreme of the progression variability are these so-called ALS reversals that, as you know, I've been studying for more than a decade. And I think I might have finally found something. So about 30% of these reversals have an abnormality in a gene. It's a promoter to another gene, which is called IGF-BP7. And this is very unusual in people with typically progressive ALS. In fact, 15% of the reversals have 2 copies of this, which we've never found in anyone with typically progressive ALS. And we've looked in other data sets, and we think that this genetic abnormality reduces the expression of the protein IGF-BP7. Now, one of many functions of that protein is to get in between a growth factor called insulin-like growth factor 1 and its receptor, which is in many places in the brain and spinal cord, but especially on motor neurons. And so the theory is the more of this protein you have, the less the interaction between this growth factor and motor neurons, the faster you progress. Reversals are expected to have very little of this protein floating around because of this genetic mutation. So we've got the first really plausible theory, 60 years from the description of the first ALS reversal, for how someone might recover from this disease. And we've got one more thing that we have to do, and we're working on it with our colleagues at ALS TDI. And that is, if we're right, there should be a clear association between progression and the amount of this protein that's floating around in your blood. And so they're looking at that right now. But if that's true, later this year, early next year, we will launch a trial that for the first time targets IGF-BP7, tries to knock it down with the goal of reversing ALS.
Wow. Well, that is amazing news. And when you talk about going back, that was my next question, is that later on this year, we'll look back on the calendar to 10 years ago when most people did the Ice Bucket Challenge in 2014. And that was an introduction to many people in the most viral social media campaign out there. If we look back at, of course, everything is underfunded and that we need more money, but how would a visit in the clinic in 2014 differ from one today? And what kind of progress have we made in that area in these last 10 years?
Yeah, the difference is I think that we can provide a lot more hope to people today than we could back then. And, you know, the hope comes from the amount of research that's going on. It's exponentially more today. And it's no doubt in part because of all the awareness and all the funding that was raised. I mean, that money actually helped us discover some of these new genes that are now being targeted in trials. But that's really where most of the hope still comes from, is in the research that's going on. And there's more of it. And I think it's more exciting today than it's ever been.
That's really good news. And you know what? I have to ask you personally, because many people might be finding this video on YouTube for the very first time. Many people search for a lot of things if they're newly diagnosed or have a family member that is as well. And they see you and they hear you and you have so much knowledge, but many will forget that you have your own personal passions. And one of those for all your life has been in the world of fashion. And I always love when you tell the story about how you dress gave you kind of that superpower and made others comfortable around you. Are you still able to keep up and stay close to the fashion world?
Yeah, I am. And that's again, sort of one of, I call it a distraction, but
Yeah.
But I mean, it's funny how a hobby has become an important part of who I am and what I do in this field. I mean, I've just realized early in my career, I've got to try to find a way to stay positive. I've got to try to, you know, create a sense of hope in the patients and families who come to see me at Duke. And there's a lot of ways I do it, but it starts with what I put on in the morning. You know, when I was a kid, I just realized, hey, if I put on something that's really bright and colorful, it just gives me this lift. And it also seems to project this positivity around me. Like people would smile when they saw me. And what a good start to a conversation. If you walk in and somebody's eyes light up and they get a big smile, it's just a different way to start a conversation. And yeah, I mean, it's led me to some of the craziest places, Dave. I mean, I've gotten to walk the runway at Men's Fashion Week from one designer who loved what I was doing. Recently connected with a designer in Nashville, Tennessee. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He designed for Johnny Cash and Elvis. And believe it or not, he had an ALS connection and he loved what I was doing. And he made me a jacket. So, I mean, who would ever think that a neurologist would connect with the designer of Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley's outfits and be able to get something cool to wear to clinic to brighten the day of the patients that come?
I'm so glad you talked about that. And thank you for letting me ask you about that, because I think as serious as your world is and your staff there at the Duke ALS Clinic is, that there has to be something that keeps you going as well. And I know that everybody that visits you enjoys spending time with you as well. Thank you to all your staff. I put up the website. If people can go and find out what you all do at the Duke ALS Clinic at dukealsclinic.org, right?
They sure can. There's a lot of information on there about who's on our team, information about the different types of research that we're doing. You know, there's even links if you're an outside physician and you're trying to refer someone here, there's information to how to do that. But I did finally also want to say, Dave, to your listeners, that we couldn't do it without you. I mean, from the early days, your group has been a tremendous partner. I mean, certainly a financial partner. And we couldn't have the team that we have, or see the number of patients that we see, or have the telemedicine program that keeps us connected with folks all over the world who've progressed too far to be able to come back in person. But there's still so much value in connecting with them, you know, to help with their quality of life and to keep them hopeful by keeping them connected to research that their local doctor might not know much about. And all that really is because of our partnership with you. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And one of the things that went behind a branding decision for our name is that word united, and that's what fuels us to continue to remain united with the efforts that you're doing, both behind the scenes and with your crew there at the Duke ALS Clinic. Dr. Bedlack, thanks so much for your time. I wish we'd do it more than once a year, but we definitely want to do it and keep this quality information coming. Thank you.
Sounds awesome, Dave. Thank you.